everyone, thanks for joining us today for our 30 on Thursday webinar, PowerApps Forms for Office 365. Just a little bit about Protiviti before we get started. We are a global consulting firm that serves more than 40% of Fortune 1000 and Fortune Global 500 companies. We are a full-service enterprise content management team and have helped hundreds of clients realize the value of SharePoint and Office 365. Our 30 on Thursday webinar series is a bi-weekly webinar series where we talk all things SharePoint, Office 365, and ECM. Our next webinar will be on February 23rd. Get the most from your people data in Office 365 and SharePoint. You can register for this webinar and see our full schedule on our website. We are hosting complimentary Office 365 migration planning roundtables in Chicago, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Houston, and Chevy Chase, Maryland in February and March. All of these complimentary events can be found on our website, ecm.protiviti.com. You can register and learn more there. Today's session is being recorded. You can access today's recording and see a past archive of all of our past webinars on our YouTube channel. For questions during today's presentation, please insert them in the question window or live tweet us your questions using hashtag 30T0365. We will be saving all the questions until after Liam's presentation today. Today's presenter is Liam Cleary, 10-time SharePoint MVP and Associate Director here at Protiviti, and I am Julia Marple, and I will be moderating today's session. All right, Liam, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now.
1 second.
Okay.
Maybe it's taken a little bit. Okay, we can see your screen now.
Okay. So let's get straight to it. First question I'm sure you all have is, what is PowerApps? Well, the official Microsoft answer is PowerApps is a service for building and using custom business apps that connect to your data and work across web and mobile, and then of course their nice sales pitch without the time and expense of custom software development. So what is it we're actually talking about? Well, of course, it's just a solution for building something that we can use within Office 365. What are the core features of PowerApps? Well, one of the first one that's kind of a really big thing for PowerApps is the ability to generate what I'm going to call an app, and I'll explain what that means, directly from the data. So for example, taking a spreadsheet and having an input form generated from that content, or maybe a SharePoint list and then having that as the back-end data and generating that front-end application automatically. You can also create completely custom applications, so you can start from scratch, don't need any data, and you can tie multiple data sets into each of those apps. One of the most important things is that you can share that app with others. Now, by default, it's shared within your organization, within Office 365, and that's with users that reside in your tenant. So you can share that with them, you can deny them access, you can apply them access if you need to. Now, when it comes to building, there are three kind of components. They're web-based applications that you can use. There's a rich client, and what I mean by a rich client is an application you install on a Windows machine that allows you to run directly within that client. And then there's a mobile client that renders on a cell phone device or a tablet. Three different avenues to actually access this app once you've built it. And then, of course, it's integrated nicely into Office 365. Of course, it's a little bit separate to SharePoint Online, though there is some integration that's available. And so we'll kind of walk through some of that integration in a second. Now, I suppose the other question is it the InfoPath replacement tool that we've all been waiting for years and years? And of course, there's three answers, yes, no, and maybe. And I'll let you decide what you think that might be. In some aspects it's yes, in some aspects it's no, purely based on some of the things you could do with an InfoPath form you are not able to do right now with a PowerApp, and maybe. It really comes down to what you decide to use PowerApps for and how you see it integrating into what you're using inside Office 365. So that's enough slides for now. Let's go straight into looking at PowerApps itself. So I'm straight into my Office 365 tenant, and I'm actually in a SharePoint site. And as you can see, we're using the modern UI. And you can see I've got my lists of libraries and document libraries and lists. And I've created two specific lists. The first one is going to be an equipment list. If I just click on this, this will give you an idea of what's here. I'm just going to make sure we can scroll across so it looks a bit, there you go. So you'll see I have some items, equipment IDs, the types of equipment, some details, and of course some pictures that are pointing out to the products that we wish to show. On top of that, I also have a purchase order list, which is obviously relating to that. So I have a purchase order number, I have the status, the dates, who purchased it, the price, and then more importantly, which application it actually connects, which piece of equipment it's connected to. So just two basic lists, nothing spectacular. These are just a lookup to that other list. Now, of course, when you're working with SharePoint Online, you're kind of limited really to the data entry screens that you can create. Now, of course, in the new modern interface, you obviously have quick edit, which obviously takes me into a new way of editing, so kind of a spreadsheet. Obviously, my images are pretty large, so it's just a spreadsheet view. And then, of course, you're limited to the new option. When you try to add a new piece of content, it's limited to the fields that you have created in the content type itself. So if I click New, it's going to open up, and you'll see there's the new modern one. So not the most exciting form. It's really just data entry. And of course, you could create custom ones yourself. But that's where the integration with things like PowerApps makes life a little bit easier for us, because I don't necessarily want to be tied to a specific entry point. Oh, I have to go to the SharePoint site. Now I have to make it responsive design. Now I have to use the SharePoint app to be able to open it. This is where integration directly here, you'll see Flow and PowerApps. And we'll kind of touch on Flow, but our focus today is PowerApps. And you'll see that I can actually click and create an app directly for PowerApps based on this information that exists here. Now what that does is that takes me off to PowerApps, and we'll do that in a moment, and lets me generate an application based on the data. But what it also does is when the Power App has been created, you'll see that that view menu where you would obviously flick between views, it lists the Power App views that you've created. So for example, I went and created one earlier called Equipment Management, which is a Power App rendering of this information. And when I actually click that, it will take me to the Power Apps view, not the standard SharePoint view of the information. So how does that process all kind of work? Well, if we click on Power Apps and just say create an app, you'll see on the first bit it slides to the right and asks me what kind of app that I would like to create. So I'm just going to call it a test for now, and we'll click create. And then you'll notice it redirects us out into Power Apps and then starts loading. And it has the most amazing graphic ever. There we go, as it starts to build. And what this is doing is this is connecting backwards to the SharePoint online site and starting to build that app automatically for me. It's looking at the site columns, the field types, the data that exists, and then it's picking a layout that it thinks will work well for my app that's being built. So we'll wait for that to finish. It'll take a few more seconds, and there we go. You can see in the background it's decided on a 3-screen build, and it's populated some of the data directly from our SharePoint online lists. And there's our application. Nice and simple, nice and straightforward. You can see it's pulled my applications, my equipment from that list. It's given me a view and also a search. If I click on the detail screen, now this is when we would click from the first screen, and it will then go to the equipment screen to give me more information. And then of course we then have an edit screen if I want to edit an existing item or I need to add a new item. Now, of course, one thing that's missing here is my images don't exist. So this is where we get the flexibility of clicking on an item. So for example, the text that exists here, and you'll see on the right-hand side, it'll then modify out and show you the list of fields that are available. So it will say, oh, hey, these fields are here, and if I drop this list down, I can specify what each of the components would be within that site. Now, what I can also do is I can also add components to the pages. So if I choose Insert in the navigation, you'll see I can put a chart, I can do media, and I can say I would like to pick an image. So I'm going to pick image. And this allows me to kind of move this around, and you'll see instantly it recognizes that I had an image field, and it's mapped that to that for us. So I can just scroll across over here, make this a little bit smaller. So you can see it's very dynamic. It knew I had an image field, I dropped an image control, it mapped the value across. Now, of course, if I didn't want to use that field, I could simply come back here and choose the drop down and say add an image file or something else. So everything maps automatically to those places. If I go to the detailed screen, of course, it would make more sense here to have to actually have a control for the image too. So I can choose image. I'm going to drag my control and kind of drop it here. And then, of course, when you click on the options that are available, you see you can go to advanced, and you can then start to specify the properties. Now, what you'll also see, and this is, we're not going to focus on this too much today, but you have the ability to modify properties that exist for a specific control that exists on the form. So you can see width and height, the colors, all those different things that you would expect from a fully fledged kind of development platform. But what's great here is I'm not actually having to write any code whatsoever. Now, if I just delete that one, what I could do instead is just select one of the fields, and when I click options, what you'll see instead is it gives me the fields that are currently visible on this form. And you'll notice this is denoted by the I. And if I scroll further down, you'll see that my image field isn't represented. And even though I could have dragged the media control and associated it, the easiest way is simply click the I. What this will do, this will then make my image show up, and you'll see it then becomes a scroller. And I can add or remove any of those fields either by pressing this, or you can just select and then physically delete that option. So you get the ability to move things around to define how that's going to look. And then, of course, the same for the edit screen. I also have the ability, if I needed to actually integrate other components that exist within the system. So I could say the camera, knowing that this would be a mobile device, I could say add the camera to this form, and then as I add a new item, I can then say take a photo and store that information directly with it. I can also do audio and all those different things in video. So it's not just something for creating a pretty form, it's something that will allow us to actually build a fully fledged application that integrates nicely into our SharePoint solution. So now that we have our kind of basic look and feel, I can go back to my home and I can say, you know, I want to change the theme. Obviously, Microsoft like to give us these wonderful looking themes, so I'm going to pick forest, make that nice and brown and green. There we go. And once we're done, once everything's completed, we can then click the File menu. Now notice I've done this completely in the browser. I haven't gone outside of this. This is all done in the browser. This piece is currently in preview. There is a rich client that you can use to edit also. But I'm going to call this test. I can choose the color for the icon that I wish to use, and then I can go through and say, this is the icon that I want to use, or something that denotes, you know, entering data. And then I can give it a description. I can then determine the orientation and the screen size. Maybe I want it to be available in landscape only, or maybe portrait. And then I can lock the ratio so it can never be moved, or the orientation. Once that's done, I can click Save. Now what this does, this saves it to PowerApps. So it doesn't save it directly back to SharePoint where we began. It saves it to our PowerApps. So if I just close this app, this will take us back. Okay. Now if I go here and click on my apps, you'll see that I have my test one that we just created and the one that I created earlier. If we want to be able to see what this looks like within the browser, we can simply click on the app and this will then launch in the browser directly, or I could have launched it in the Windows app, or I could have launched it on my cell phone and got the same user experience. So we'll wait for this to load. This will go full screen. It'll look pretty big in the browser, obviously. This will take us back to edit, and then I can just simply click the run option on the right hand side once this loads. And that gives us a view of what each of these look like. So you can see that I can quickly go backwards and forwards. I can click on the items. I can scroll. I can also go and say edit, and I can modify those values. And I can also update SharePoint directly here. Now if I go back to SharePoint and click on my equipment, we'll just refresh that. If we now go to all items, you'll see that my test Power App is now visible here as a view. So the integration that's been done so far is very simple. I can create what effectively is a view. If I want to view my equipment management view, for example, what it does is it goes and connects to the data, and then it allows me to open directly from here. I can edit this back into the PowerApps client or the web browser. I can also make this private, so it's just mine. If I click open, this will take me out to a new page, and it will render it in what's called the PowerApps web player and should render it full screen. And this is the same experience whether you're on a mobile device, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop like me, or a laptop, whatever it might be. And you'll see this view is a little bit different. I move the images around. I can also search, and we'll just type Len, and I get the Lenovo. I can click, get access to the information. I can edit. And if I go back here and say we just want to append, it's got 1 terabyte of storage, click Save. What this is now going to do is this has saved it into the app. But if I actually come back to my view and go back to all items, what should now have happened, let me just scroll this across, is it now should say 1 terabyte. So that's now given me a direct link back to the original data that I had in the SharePoint list. Now to put that in perspective, that means if I'm using a mobile device, I can now take my SharePoint lists with me and access them from anywhere, because the key to this is because you're using Office 365, it's tied to your 365 account and is available across the internet worldwide. So that means that when I have the PowerApps app on my cell phone, I now get access to what effectively would be internal data that wouldn't normally be available for people outside the organization. Now if we click my purchase orders, the same principle can apply. I can go to PowerApps, I can click Create App, I can say View, let's just call it View PO, click Create. Same principle is going to apply. It's going to go ahead and connect, it's going to grab the data, it's going to tie those things together, it's going to do the little logo thing in a minute and generate my app, and everything will be connected. And then we have 2 apps, one for actually managing the equipment and one for managing the purchase orders. And we'll leave that to catch up in a second. So any user who has permission to the site can generate these. But what's more important is once you have an app, you can then go through and define a flow that goes along with the actual process. Let me just come back to my lists. My SharePoint site doesn't seem to load now. I'm not going to show you the password. I know you all want to see it. Okay, so we're back. Let me just go back to my site contents. Sorry about that. It seemed to have disappeared for a second. So once we have the PowerApps created for a specific list, then what we can do is tie things together. So the principle, for example, would be when we add a purchase order to this list, we would then want to update the equipment list to say something has been taken off or whatever that value might be. So this is where we can actually come into here and say create a flow, which will then give you a list of templates. Now, of course, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but the beauty of this is once you've created a flow, so if I just click see more templates, this will give you a kind of a list of what's here. I can sort by SharePoint, and you'll see that we can actually say, well, when something is created or something is modified, then do this or do that. If I say create a blank flow, you'll see that I can then choose the service that I'm trying to connect to. So I can say actually for SharePoint, when something is created, so a new item is created, I can specify a SharePoint site. So if we just go back and copy my SharePoint URL, put that here, I can then choose from my list. I can say when a purchase order is added, next step. Then I can go through and start either looping or adding an action that will do something within Office 365 or something else. I can have it talk to any number of these applications. Now, once the flow is created, what's great is if I go back to here and just come back out and choose one of my, let's go to equipment and choose my existing Power App, equipment management, is that from the actual Power App itself, I can then associate any of the Microsoft flows that I've created so they connect to the app also. So I can either have them run directly within the app, or I can have them run from within the actual list within the SharePoint site too. So that gives us the power of kind of both. So you take a regular SharePoint list, instead of using the standard views, you're going to build a Power App that's going to give you a greater, richer experience that can work across multiple devices. You're then going to create a flow to automate that process in the background. So maybe update list items, maybe send emails, maybe connect to SAP or something else. And then I have the whole thing with me. And I don't need to build, as Microsoft said, and spend all that money on expense of using custom software development because it's now built out of the box. Now, of course, the one thing you did see, I'm using the browser. The browser is currently in preview. But if I was using the rich client, which is here, the Windows application that you can install, then of course the key to using it is it will list all of the applications that are available. You can then download those offline, the same as you would for the mobile application. And in all fairness, the experience is fairly rich, much richer than the browser. And you can obviously edit them, you can assign permissions, you can also set the details and change, and whatever the connections are and the flows are, you can manage that exactly the same as I was doing inside the web page itself. So the experience is very simple across whichever application and platform that you decide to use. So, okay. So I suppose just to wrap up on some final thoughts, it was a bit of a quick look through. The first thing is just learn PowerApps. It really is straightforward. Microsoft are doing a great job. There's lots of documentation that's out there now. And there's lots of webinars and videos that have been out there too. And there's some Channel 9 information. If you've not been to Channel 9, go to the Channel 9 site, as well as the ones that us at Protiviti are working on. So learn how to use PowerApps. Obviously, the integration with Office 365 is fairly limited right now, purely based on views. Learn Microsoft Flow as well. It may not be the be-all and end-all, and it's not really a replacement for a workflow, a SharePoint workflow solution. But if you're looking for something that can integrate across multiple stacks, across the 365 tenancy and other applications, then Microsoft Flow is the platform to use. It's really just the workflow component for PowerApps itself. And not everything works well as a Power App. You know, just because you can use PowerApps doesn't mean that you need to. And as much as in the example we just created a simple app, some of those things are quite useful. The ability for me to take something on a cell phone and use it from anywhere in the world, that's a big thing. With people always wanting to use, access the intranet on a mobile device, now we have the ability to make an application that can be taken with us. And then, of course, as always, deeper integration is expected. Microsoft will be working on some of those things, making some of those adjustments and tweaking it so everything kind of seamlessly evolves. I think the big thing to watch here is as Microsoft evolve the other components within Office 365, with Teams and groups and the Skype integration and everything else, that you'll expect to see deeper integration with what PowerApps can do. And of course, PowerApps is limited on some things. There are still things it doesn't support, but it's been modified and worked on constantly. So that would be my kind of thoughts for today on PowerApps. Definitely look at it, and of course, definitely look at Microsoft Flow.
All right, we have some questions here. Is PowerApps a separate purchase from the Office 365 license?
So PowerApps itself is available within your 365 tenant. If it doesn't show up, then you'll need to just go across and go to powerapps.microsoft.com, and then you'll be able to register. Now, there are some instances where it doesn't work, but for the majority of licenses in Office 365, PowerApps is part of that now. You don't have to pay extra for it. It's just part of the Office 365 tenant.
How do you make PowerApps and Flow visible in the action bar in SharePoint?
Oh, in the top bar as they appear there. So as long as you've enabled the new modern user experience and you're using SharePoint lists, now that is a differentiator. You can't create a Power App for a document library. It doesn't quite work that way at the moment, but for lists you can. So if you simply create a custom list in a SharePoint Office 365 site using the modern view, then those links will show up, as long as you've obviously connected those two together inside your Office 365 tenant. So make sure you've got your account connected to PowerApps, and then when you go into the site, everything just renders in the new UI.
Okay. Can you use both InfoPath and PowerApps?
Yes. So it's not replaced InfoPath. Obviously, the standard thing is that InfoPath is, even though it still has support, there's going to be no love for what InfoPath can do. If you're using InfoPath, then you can still use InfoPath. Obviously, within Office 365, that's a bit more complicated. For obviously SharePoint on-premises, then of course you can still use it as you need to. But they serve two different purposes. There's no crossover as such, so you can definitely use that versus this, or you can use both.
So is InfoPath staying as well for Office 365?
So InfoPath still exists in certain places. Whether Microsoft decide to continue that in some of under the covers, that's entirely up to them. But right now, their big bet and push is PowerApps. That's their official kind of, this is what we want you to use for creating some of the cool forms in the modern UI. And of course, there will be other things coming in the future to kind of facilitate that too. So if it was me personally, I wouldn't bet on using InfoPath going forward. And Microsoft have said the same.
Okay. Do you need Windows 10 for this application?
For the PowerApps application to be installed, it is one of the modern ones. I'm actually running it on Windows 8. So it's not actually Windows 10 specific. So the app that you install will work perfectly fine on Windows 8. It works on my Windows 10 machine too. And then of course for the mobile devices, it's available on iOS and Android as well.
Okay, great. How can you add data filtering in PowerApps? For example, for your inventory of device, only certain users access certain equipment.
So that would be more of a permission type thing. Without writing custom code pieces into PowerApps, which you can do, you can't go in and write C# obviously, but you can write elements. You would probably in that instance look at creating different types of PowerApps. So for example, if you don't want people to see certain fields or whatever else, then you would need to restrict that. PowerApps doesn't necessarily have the ability to say, I only want to show 3 of those types of products versus somebody else logging in. And in all fairness, SharePoint struggles with that too. But PowerApps will respect permissions. So if you do go in and a list has X number of items, let's say you have a list of items and you do individual permissioning on the items, then it will respect that because it's based on the same permissioning standards. But there's no magical way to say, I only want to show these to you and those to somebody else.
Okay, great. We're a little bit over time, but we'll take one more question here. Do you need the studio version or the web preview version?
You can use either. I use the web preview version to be able to create everything. I did use the Windows one for creating some of the stuff before. Both are feature parity. They're more or less the same now. So you can use either or. The preview actually works really well, but as you saw, as I was presenting, sometimes the browser just decides, especially if they've made changes, it is in preview, so just be aware that they could make changes at any point. So the rich client tends to work a little bit better and is more solid. But I like doing it all in the browser. I think it's a better experience because I don't have to come out of something contextually to come back to create. So for me, I use the preview right now. It's just easier, and I think that's going to be the way that people will create things going forward.
Okay, great. That is all the time we have for today. We are a couple minutes over time. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Liam, for the great presentation.
Thank you.
We will be back on February 23rd. Keep up with our events on ecm.protiviti.com, and we will see you guys in a month or so. Have a great day.